Ben Affleck was often unhappy as a married man, and now he's twice divorced. He's far from alone. A growing wave of men are struggling to make modern marriage work for them, and many have walked away for good. If Ben blames himself for failed marriages, maybe he shouldn't. It looks like he tried, but there's a greater problem with marriage and long-term relationships. Lately, I've been contemplating why I feel sorry for the dedicated husband, and I think there are actually many reasons. One is the lack of freedom. Another is the loss of individuality. But there's something even more fundamental than that. The whole setup, one man, one woman, locked into domestic life for decades, just doesn't feel natural. It can so easily become a living nightmare. Our forefathers had a different way of relating to women. My dad regularly went on fishing trips or played golf. My grandfather also played golf and had a speedboat. They could spend hours gardening or in the workshop with no one bothering them. That was how they maintained their sanity. Their solitude was accepted, even expected. But that's disappearing. That kind of space is hard to come by now. You skip a dinner or disappear for a few hours, and suddenly it's a conversation. There's this unspoken expectation that if you're not constantly involved and present, something must be wrong, like you're emotionally distant or not committed. Personally, I wasn't built to be in a modern domestic relationship for decades on end. How stifling, and I think many other men fall into this category. The mismatch between what we naturally want as men and what is required to sustain a successful marriage is considerable, and it seems to be only growing over time as expectations for male behaviour are twisted to fit into a feminised society. More on that later. We can use science to help explain the decision of many men to go their own way, and why you might be better off single. Let's start with neuroticism. You may have heard the psychological fact that women, on average, score higher in neuroticism than men. It's one of the most consistent findings in personality research. Neuroticism includes things like emotional reactivity, anxiety, and mood instability. Now think about what that means in a long-term relationship. It doesn't mean all women are unstable.
I've got to get out of here. I've got to get out of here.
Calm down. Get a hold of yourself.
Stewardess, please let me handle this.
I've got to get
Calm down. Now get back to your seat. I'll take care of this. Calm down. Calm down. Get a hold of yourself.
Doctor, you're wanted on the phone. Everything's going to be all right. Please.
But statistically, a male partner is more likely to be dealing with someone who experiences stronger emotional ups and downs. That's not always a problem, but over time, it can create friction, especially if you're someone who prefers calm, steady interactions. A small disagreement can turn into lingering tension. An offhand comment can be taken personally. And sometimes a man ends up feeling like he has to adjust his behaviour just to maintain peace, even if nothing major is wrong. It doesn't happen in every relationship, but it happens often enough to be a problem. And when combined with the cultural narrative that men should always be emotionally available, it puts pressure on men to absorb crap they don't want to get involved with. This isn't about blaming women, it's about recognizing a difference in temperament, one that can spoil a relationship. Men are expected to keep tuning into worry and stress, when most of us are more interested in solving problems without the drama. Now let's talk about freedom. It's probably the most obvious difference between being single and being in a relationship, and yet it always seems to be downplayed, like freedom is some immature craving you're supposed to grow out of once you find the right person. But that's nonsense. For a lot of men, autonomy isn't just about the big things. It's the small daily freedoms that matter. It's deciding what to eat, not having to negotiate over dinner or pretend to like some vegetarian food experiment just to keep the peace. It's going to bed when you're tired, waking up without small talk, sitting around doing nothing on a Sunday morning without guilt, judgment, or a to-do list that isn't yours. It's walking around your place in silence, leaving your clothes on the chair, just being yourself. And sure, that might sound lazy or selfish to someone else, but if you're a man who values your inner life, who gets energy from solitude, then these freedoms are essential to your peace of mind. You're not just avoiding conflict, you're protecting your mental space. Even in a good relationship, you give some of that up. You give up doing things your way in your time, without checking in or explaining yourself. You start having to coordinate, compromise, negotiate, and if you're with a bossy partner, which, let's be honest, a lot of women are these days, that loss of freedom ramps up fast. You get told the housework has to be split 50-50, while the things you already do somehow don't count. It often goes further. You find her constantly offering opinions on your decisions, as if you need her input to keep your life running properly. But if you spent time on your own, you know everything works just fine when you're in charge. You don't need help deciding how to live your life. And if she's a feminist, the kind who doesn't really respect men in general, it goes even deeper. She assumes you can't be trusted to lead, to decide, to manage things on your own. So she steps in, she inserts herself into decisions that were never hers to begin with. And when you push back, you're told you're being difficult or dismissive or not doing your share. Over time, you end up living in a way that's far from what you actually want. You start adjusting your behaviour, your instincts, your lifestyle, not because her way is better, but because the resistance never stops. You're managing her reactions more than you're living your own life. If that kind of setup wears you down more than it gives back, then staying single could make more sense. The great unspoken truth that few males dare speak is the reality that men are not actually meant to be spending all their time trying to make women happy. Historically, the amount of time devoted to this was minuscule. Females in a tribe or family had each other. Men had other priorities most of the time. Only about 40% of men throughout human history reproduced. The rest didn't pass on their genes, yet they still played essential roles. Hunting, building, exploring, mentoring, serving the tribe in ways that didn't involve pairing off. Most weren't husbands or fathers, and no one saw that as failure. Many risked and lost their lives in war. Young men were often the first to die, while others worked under constant pressure to provide and protect. Their value wasn't measured by how emotionally available they were, but by what they could offer to the group. The idea of a man devoting himself full-time to keeping one woman happy, emotionally, physically, socially, is incredibly recent. In tribal and traditional societies, a man might have led a large family group or clan, but he wasn't hovering around his partner checking if she felt seen or heard. He had bigger concerns. So did she. Survival took up all your energy. Food, shelter, safety. Those were the priorities. No one had the bandwidth to micromanage their relationship. You didn't sit around analysing your tone or whether you'd offered enough reassurance that week. You got on with what needed to be done. Now men are expected to act like full-time emotional caregivers. Always available, always gentle, always tuned in. You're supposed to make her feel special, secure, admired, supported, challenged, protected, and never get tired of doing it. That's unnatural, and it's not what men evolved for. And yet, even if a man does all of that, when he provides, stays loyal, holds the household together, it's still often met with resentment.
It's like there were 10 years when I couldn't stand my husband.
You do say that. You say 10 years.
And guess when it happened? When those kids were little, right? And for 10 years, while we're trying to build our careers and, worrying about school and who's doing what and what, I was like, this isn't even.
Sometimes ingratitude just simmers. Other times it turns into divorce, the loss of his kids, and years of child support payments. He sacrifices everything and ends up being treated like he failed. This is all a bit rich when you consider that masculine energy wasn't designed to orbit someone else's emotional state. It was meant to go into work, physical effort, risk, problem solving, independence. That's how men contributed. That's where they found meaning. For men who've lived alone and experienced life on their own terms, returning to that modern domestic role often feels like giving up something important. You're not leading anymore. You're managing, You're not living simply. You're negotiating everything. There's nothing wrong with men today, but there's something seriously wrong with what's being asked of them. We've created a culture where the so-called ideal man is emotionally fluent, endlessly cooperative, always in tune with his partner's feelings, the sensitive new age man. It's not just encouraged, it's demanded. And if you say that isn't you, if you say your strengths lie elsewhere, you're immediately seen as outdated, emotionally stunted, or in need of correction. Boys are raised to be gentle and emotionally open, even when everything in their nature points in a different direction. Their rough edges are smoothed out, their instincts dulled, their competitiveness discouraged. We don't teach them to master themselves, we teach them to soften themselves for others. Instead of accepting boys and men for who they are, we try to turn them into versions of what modern women say they want, as if that's the only standard that matters. But men were never meant to be domesticated like that. The role was practical: build, fix, defend, focus. Long stretches of solitude weren't a problem. They were normal. No one expected constant emotional engagement. The work spoke for itself. We opened with Ben Affleck for a reason. 2 marriages, 2 divorces. He clearly values love and family, but even with all the resources in the world, it still doesn't work. That says a lot. And for some men, especially today, contentment means staying single, not as a failure, not as a phase, but as a valid and often better way of living. A life where you're not constantly adjusting yourself for someone else. One that's clean, direct, and driven by your own values. Maybe it's time we stopped apologizing for that.